So how does cultural change come? Let me transition to a sociological perspective. Some ask, Pastor Mark, how come you're not more involved politically? How come you're not, one who's a moral crusader? How come you don't, go to war on certain issues? Well, it's not because I'm a coward, and it's not because I'm afraid of controversy. Right? My job is to teach the Bible and to be a good missionary, seeing people meet Jesus, and I need to pastor people regardless of their political affiliation or persuasion. In addition, I do want to affect cultural change, and I'm not afraid to say that. And I think sometimes God's people need to stand up for just laws, and they need to vote out of biblical conviction. But I want us to be wise, and I want us to look at things from, I would say, a more powerful, biblical, gospel perspective. Okay? And I'm going to take this from a man named James Davison Hunter. He wrote a book called To Change the World. He's a sociologist. He is a Christian. And he's looking historically at how cultural change happens. And he says that it is not the majority who define and shape culture. It's a powerful minority. That in the history of the Western world, hundreds, maybe thousands of people, I'm summarizing a very complicated argument, are responsible for the totality of what is Western civilization. He goes on to illustrate his points by saying things like, most Christians would agree that the culture is getting worse, right? The way it treats women with pornography and sex trafficking and sexual assault, you'd say it's getting worse. The murder of the unborn, the fact that 50 million people can't vote this election because they didn't make it out of the womb. Right? The culture's getting worse and darker, and what's on TV and what's in movies and what's on the internet and what's happening to children and how men are irresponsible. It's getting worse. Yet, the majority of Americans would say, I believe in God. I believe the Bible is God's word. The majority would say they believe in the God of the Bible. And the question is, well, how can the majority believe one thing and everything becomes worse? Conversely, he will use certain minority groups by percentage of population and show that they have inordinate influence. So in the United States of America, about 3% of people are Jewish, but they're powerful. What percentage of people, according to the more recent Gallup polls, do you think identify themselves as homosexual? 3.4%. That's not a huge number of people, but that's a very influential community of people. And so he uses these illustrations to point out this fact. It's not one human heart that changes culture. It's not a whole bunch of human hearts that change culture. People shape culture depending upon where they're positioned in culture. He uses this analogy. We each have different financial capital, right? Some of you, your net worth is far greater than others. As it is financially, so it is socially. Some of you have much social capital, some of you have little social capital. And what he's saying is, it's not just one person, but where they're positioned culturally who is able to affect the most change. I'll give you an analogy, a simple analogy. If you've been around Mars Hill, you've heard it. Many of you are new, so I need to repeat it. I went to India some years ago to meet with a church planter of ours we've partnered with for many years, a very great man of God. And we got in a rickshaw, which is kind of like a car made by Jack Kevorkian out of a bicycle with a motor on it, okay? And so we get in a rickshaw, and we're following the path of this river. And the river starts toward its head more up toward a mountain. And it's pretty clean up there. But then the further you drive along this river for hours and hours and hours, it gets dirtier, darker, grosser, and stinkier. Because it's open sewers. Everybody flushes their toilet. It flows through an open sewer in the street and goes where? Into the river. And people throw their garbage in the river. Anything you don't want, you're like, man, this is nasty. I don't want this near my house. You throw it in the river, you're like, oh, it's gone. There are dead animals in the river. People are going to the bathroom in the river. Trash is going in the river. What this means is, as you follow this river downstream, pretty soon, it does not smell well. It's like Satan's breath. I mean, that's what it smelled like. I don't know what else to compare it. It was horrible. I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And people live there. Culture is like that. It has a source that it flows from, and it flows downstream. Now, to use my analogy, if you wanted to clean up that river, the key would be to start as far upstream as possible, right? If you're down at the end of the river saying, oh, I got to fish all of this garbage and sewage out of the river, it's never going to change. And everyone along the way is going to be sick. So to affect change, you get as far upstream as you can and try to stop that flow of filth. So it is culturally. So it is culturally.